Hey guys, welcome to Synths and Sounds. Since my last video, you should know that I'm a huge fan of vintage keyboards. Wow. Has it really been that long? Anyways, today I brought another one. Actually, a friend of mine gave me his PSR-36 from Yamaha to make a review about it. So thank you very much, Manu. So let's have a look at it. Is it any worth today? Are the sounds still good? Or should you maybe even get one or at least pick one up if you find one? Let's find it out in today's video. The PSR-36 takes us straight back to 1988. Back then it was probably one of Yamaha's more professional keyboards, featuring 61 full-size keys and stereo speakers. While the former way of analog sound generation had become outdated, sampling was still costly and hadn't yet fully taken over the keyboard market. It was widely used for drum machines, with rumplers being all over the keyboard market already. But in the case of the PSR-36, the melodic sounds were using FM synthesis that was premiered 5 years before in the legendary DX7. The PSR-36 underlines its quality in the separate chips it had for beats and synth sounds. The YM3419 was responsible for the drum sounds, and the YM3420 carried a CPU as well as a 4-operator FM synthesis section that was exceeding the 2-operator FM chips used in earlier Yamaha keyboards. Together they carried a huge potential of possible sounds, making it one of the more versatile keyboards of that time. With a gigantic storage of 80 drum patterns, 128 bass patterns and more than 100 chord patterns, you really had a lot of customization on the tip of your fingers. While 32 sound presets were not a very big number for 1988, it featured what Yamaha called a digital synthesizer. 5 faders could be used to customize any of the presets with different settings for envelopes and filters, making it a somewhat programmable synthesizer, unlike standard keyboards that would only rely on presets. But Yamaha's competition, namely Casio, was going strong as well. A year before the PSR-36, Casio had released the HT series, including the HT3000 that I reviewed recently. So if you wanted to get this somewhat professional keyboard in the late 1980s, you probably would have taken both of them into consideration. But not every piece of gear stands the test of time similarly well. So is the PSR-36 any good today? Should you even get one? To find that out, let's have a look at the PSR-36's functions and listen to what you can get out of it. So let's first have a look at the rhythm section. So while it just looks like 16 drum patterns, it's actually many more. This is the standard disco setting. Pops. And so on, you get the point. But now comes the interesting thing which makes this actually become 80 drum patterns. Once we pick one of them, we have actually 5 different variations. And while obviously not all of them sound cool, inside of these variations are hidden some really cool sounds. Additionally, you get a custom programmer, which is also a very cool feature. So once you clear it and you start programming, You first will get whatever beat you had chosen before, but then you can clear it. And you will be left only with the hi-hat. I didn't find a way to remove this hi-hat, but now you have something to start a beat with. Which will automatically be quantized. And also it will be saved, at least as long as you don't turn it off. I'm not sure whether it will save it afterwards, but you can play it again as often as you like. And actually, as you can see, it's very hand-on, it's very simple, you don't get a lot of features, but to create quick and easy custom drum beats, that's a really cool feature. You also, same as in the HT3000, get a fully programmable drum machine. So that's really cool. Obviously you can also change the tempo, but you don't get any BPM counter, so you have to rely on your ear on how fast it is, or you would have to rely on any other gear which measures the tempo. Additionally to the rhythm section, you obviously also have an accompaniment, like in any typical 80s keyboard, which means you get a bass synthesizer and accompaniment by chords, which you, similarly to any keyboard, you can choose to play by hand or also automatically. I like this one, which is kind of semi-automatic. You choose the notes which should then be played, and the rhythm section takes out of it what it thinks is right to do with it. And again, you get a lot of customization options. So for each of the different drum settings, you will get 8 different kinds of bass patterns and 8 different kinds of chord variations. So again, you get a lot of customization options. Let's, for example, go with a 16 beat and see what different kind of basses we can get out. Again, if you try looking for different combinations in between beats and bass patterns, you have a lot of variety. You can find for each of the 16 sounds 8 different bass patterns. Maybe some are similar, I haven't checked them all, but generally it's 16 times 8, so 128 different bass patterns, more or less. And some of them are really cool, some of them are not so cool. And same goes for the chord variations. Let's have a listen to a few of them. Additionally to the different kind of patterns, you obviously also get different kind of sounds. So let's just go very quickly through them. I like bass number 2 the most, but there are some other usable sounds as well. So once again, you have a few limitations. For example, that you won't get the very deep basses if you play them manually. You have no choice to switch the bass section, which is this part in between octaves. So you will be limited to these notes, this one being the lowest, when you play it manually. But once you hit a chord pattern, it actually can go lower than this note. So you can easily hear in that pattern we got a deeper note than this one. For the chords you also get quite some different sounds. Once you hit keyboard split, you will be able to only play chords without having the bass accompaniment. Before switching to the digital synthesizer, let's have a quick word about polyphony. Generally, the PSR-36 is 8-voice polyphonic. But once you start using the accompaniment section, you will have lesser than 8 voice to play on your synth, since a part of that voices are used for the bass and the chords. Actually, it's 1 note for the bass at the time, 3 notes for the chords at the time, which leaves you with 4 playable notes for the synthesizer once you activate the chord section. But for our next step, let's focus on the synthesizer and let's turn off the rhythms. So for the beginning, it's just a basic preset replay machine. So let's go very quickly through all of them. So as you can hear, you already get quite a variety of FM synthesizer sounds out of these 32 presets, which is pretty cool, and they sound rather decent in my opinion, while they lack the really cool analog low end as all the FM or most of the FM sounds do in my opinion. But what if these 32 presets are not enough for you? Well, in that case, you have the digital synthesizer. It is quite powerful, but not as powerful as the name indicates. Because what you will do is you will change the presets in some kind of way. You will never be able to do a sound from scratch. You will just be able to modify any of the presets. So let's go with the very basic brass one. So as long as the digital synthesizer is turned off, it sounds like this. Once it's turned on, it can sound very many different ways. Right now it sounds like this. because we have different settings as before for spectrum, brilliance, envelope, vibrato and detune. Let's start off with the envelope. You don't really get an typical ADSR envelope. It's something rather weird, but for setting 1 I figured out the attack is quite low. And then we can continue. So you see one of the difficult points of this digital synthesizer. You get these different settings, but they are not really labeled intuitively. You don't really see by these settings what the different settings mean. And you can figure out that lower settings for the envelope means longer attack, and as you go up it becomes punchier, but it's not very regular, and that makes it a bit hard to understand. Then you also have spectrum and brilliance, and I figured out it's something like a filter and a filter resonance for these two. But since this is a FM synthesizer, you would never get a typical filter sections on one of these FM synthesizers. So I think what Yamaha was trying was going for something that feels like an analog filter, cutoff and resonance, but since it's emulated by FM synthesis, it's something weirder. But let's have a listen to it. So as you can hear, spectrum changes the sound quite dramatically, but yet again it's not labeled logically to me, which means 1 and 5 sound rather similar, and the ones between sound very different. So let's go back to spectrum 1 and listen to the brilliance setting. I think it sounds quite obvious that this is meant to be something like resonance. I don't know why they didn't call it resonance. It does something similar to it, amplifying like the middle frequencies or higher frequencies of the tone if you increase the balance setting. Let's try it on another spectrum setting. Then obviously vibrato and detune are two of the things that are labeled more logically and that make more sense, that once you increase vibrato, you increase the vibrato of the sound. For detune, I didn't really get what it does. It does something, it does it kind of detune. Once I used it, I really got very wonky sounds. It was actually out of tune and I didn't really understand why. But yeah, it's in the nature of this synthesizer that it's not really to the end understandable. To me, it just doesn't sound very harmonically or very musically, but maybe you will find a use for the detune. Anyways, right now we have changed our sound in a quite dramatic way, so if we listen to it and then turn the digital synthesizer off, you will realize how much we have changed our initial preset. So you really get the option to make something quite different out of the presets. And having all these presets combined with the synthesizer functions for each of the presets, it's a very cool function. Also, you get the duet mode, which is something quite interesting. I used it in the song in the beginning. You kind of can play a harmony with just one finger in the melody section. Again, it's not very logically or intuitive to me, but to add some interesting random sounds and random harmonies to whatever you want to play, once you use the rhythm section as well, you get a really cool additional feature with that. Also, there is a chord sequencer, but I really didn't have the time to look into that. I think pitch and MIDI is kind of self-explanatory. You get some fills which I didn't showcase separately, but I used them in my first song. And you also can add an intro and ending to your rhythm patterns. So, as you guys could see by the description of the digital synthesizer of the Yamaha PSR-36, I didn't get too happy with it. It just leaves you kind of limited. These 5 steps of modulation just isn't that much, especially if you compare it to the Casio HT3000, which has a digitally controlled analog filter. So there you can modulate the sound much more in real time, and on that point I always felt a little bit limited with the Yamaha PSR-36. But luckily, since recently, I have a Moog grandmother lying around, which luckily has an external sound input. So I sent the sound of the Yamaha PSR-36 through the Moog's analog filter. And by just having that filter and filter cutoff and a LFO to modulate that filter, you can get way more creative with the PSR-36. So I just sent the sound from the PSR-36 through the Moog's filter, and the result is actually pretty cool. So I won't talk above it, but I will just keep it running and leave some written comments so you know what's going on. So, should you get a Yamaha PSR-36? Well, it always depends. If you find a PSR-36 in a thrift shop for a couple of bucks, you should make sure to pick it up, since it actually is really cool. As for all the 80s keyboards, the vibes coming out of it are just cool. When I played on it first, it was at my friend's place, and I just selected some presets, let some sounds running, and we had a dance party within 5 minutes. And it's very plug and play, and you can immediately have fun with it. Yet I have some experience with different 80s keyboards, and there are many good amongst them, like the very ancient Casio Tone 701, which is so analog, and Casio's competitor HT3000. In that direct comparison, I feel like the Casio is a bit better. I like to modulate sounds, and on that point the Yamaha leaves me a bit limited, and I thought there could be more. Maybe it's due to it being an FM synthesizer, which are actually very hard to program and to modulate, and with the PSR-36 not having a mod wheel, that's a bit disappointing. Also, it doesn't have full-size audio outputs. You have a headphone output, which is stereo in one full-size jack, but on the backside there's only synth outputs, so you need some kind of adapters to use it in a normal studio. It also lacks the pitch wheel and some other features that I liked on the Casio HT3000. On the other side, the drum sounds are really cool, and all the rhythm section, all the accompaniment, the bass sounds are really, really cool, and I really had a good time with the PSR-36. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoyed this video as well. So if you enjoyed it, remember to leave a like. If you have any commentary, any question, any recommendations, leave a comment. Also let me know if you want to see the Moog Grandmother. I got it specially to perform live, but it's not so typical for my channel, since there is so much videos about the Grandmother other than about the PSR-36. So if you still want me to cover the Moog Grandmother, let me know that. Thanks for watching. This was Jochen, and don't forget to subscribe for more synths and sounds.